As we go look at the second section here in 2.1, I was actually mistaken. I figured we were going full force into lines, but we are not. We're going to talk first, well, we're going to talk about primarily two super important formulas. One is the distance formula, and the other is the midpoint formula. Where they come from is both pretty easy to understand. Before we look here at this, let me take you to a picture that'll help us. So we've plotted these 2 points, they've plotted these 2 points, and we want to know the distance between them. So we want to know from here to here. But look what they've done. They've created it into a triangle. And so by making this right triangle here, what we've really done is we've created something that's the Pythagorean theorem. So do you remember a squared plus b squared equals c squared? So if you have a right triangle, this is the Pythagorean theorem, where a and b are the two sides here. It can be, it doesn't matter which one, a and b, and c is the hypotenuse. And so the distance formula is just essentially the Pythagorean theorem. That's where it comes from. So if you're saying, well, how would that be? This side a here is just going to be the distance from the x's. So we're just finding how long this side is from -3 to 2. And another way to think of that, can you see that it would just be this? If you subtract these 2 points from each other, the double negative, this is going to show me this length is 5. So 2 minus -3 is going to be 5. So I have the length of this side. And then we could do the same trick here, but we could do it with the y's. So I could find the distance here from the y's by doing, give me a spot here, 3 minus -1, and that is 4. So this length is 4. Now we have the length of the sides, so we could then square them, and they would equal the hypotenuse squared. But if we wanted to find just the hypotenuse, we could square root all of this here. And what we get is the distance formula. It is the Pythagorean theorem. That's exactly what it is. There's nothing else to it. Okay, so I did some of this already. So we've got the points being set up inside of here. We had 5 and 4, which I showed you above. Now we're going to square each of these, add them together, we take the square root. So we have the square root of 41, which doesn't have a precise root. So let's go ahead and let's do one ourselves here. So we're going to do the second x minus the first x, and then square it, plus the second y minus the first y, and then we're going to square it. So again, this formula is not something that's really all that necessary to memorize, because it's really just the Pythagorean theorem if you just think it through. But it is super important, so make sure you've got that down. So I'd have 10 squared here plus 5 squared. So 100 plus 25, I'm going to have the square root of 125. Now we could simplify that root here. Do I want to do that? I guess so. I don't know if that's really the... So we'll have a section on this later, I think, or a refresher. So there's several ways to do this. Oops, not 20. Sorry, that's not right. So the number 125 could be made up of 25 times 5. And I picked 25 because it's a perfect square. And so I can square root 25, and that is 5. I could bring that out front. I'd have a 5 left over on the inside. So it's the same thing as the square root of 125, but here's a simplified version. So there's our distance. Now, the midpoint formula is also super intuitive. It's simply averaging. If I want to know the distance, let me see what I got here. No, they don't really talk about it. Okay, so if I wanted to know the distance here between these 2 points, this is all I would do. This formula is the average in the x direction. This part is the average in the y direction. Well, an average is the middle. If you take your 2 scores on a test and you average them together, you'd add them up, divide by 2, and you'd have the middle score. Well, if we find the middle for the x's and we find the middle for the y's, we get the middle for this whole line segment. Okay, so let's try it. So we're just going to average the x's, we're going to average the y's, and we get the midpoint. Okay, let's try again here. We're going to average the x's, and we're going to average the y's. So this would be negative 10 divided by 2, we get negative 5. This is going to be 5 divided by 2, we will just leave it as 5/2. Okay, I think this section is almost over. These 2.1 here has been quite easy here, but if we have the diameter of a circle, that's a line segment. So I've got my circle, my diameter is coming across here, and I want to find the center of the circle. Isn't that the midpoint of this line? That's all it is. So the diameter goes from one side of the circle to the other. If I want the center, that's the midpoint of that line segment. So I can just use the midpoint formula. I'm adding my x's, averaging them, I should say, averaging my y's, and I'm done. Okay, super fast, super quick. If you need some examples, I'll try to make some example videos, but basically the idea is that the distance formula is just the Pythagorean theorem. And what else? And then the midpoint formula is just the average of the x's and the average of the y's. And average finds the middle, so let's find the middle in the x's and find the middle in the y's, and we've got it.